So John mentioned the two later books in the TV series. The book on the left is the one I use teaching at UCLA. The one on the right is the companion book for the PBS series, which I'm proud to say is shown in about 4 million homes in the United States. When I teach, I insist that the class is half public health students and half architecture, planning, and other students. And I have them do joint presentations towards the end. And one of my favorites was the planning student was designing a transit-oriented development, and the public health student was, her thesis was around violence prevention, and she was very concerned particularly against violence for women. And they had to partner to do this presentation. They worked several weeks on it, and at the end of it, he completely changed the TOD and put lots more sight lines and ways to really put eyes on the street in deep ways. And she never thought about everything around me was in somebody's head. Some architect thought about this. The world just wasn't there because it happened to be there. And it was a very successful partnership. They did a terrific presentation and a year later got married. Well, in truth, public health and planning and architecture have been married for a long time. We just have gone through a difficult divorce called the 20th century. So I'm going to talk about this. Now, it's very interesting for me to, particularly with my, I was a Jesuit seminarian for several years, and to have the caduceus for medicine up there and have the bishop's chair, the cathedra, sitting here, and to be surrounded by architects, really, I feel oriented. One of the things I learned from the Jesuits, and by the way, I'm sure Notre Dame teaches this, is mec sano in corpore sano, a healthy mind and a healthy body. You can't have either one is wrong, the whole is wrong. And so carrying that forward, the other reason I put the picture of my grandchild here, our grandchild, is that, and as a pediatrician, the early life events enormously shape the temperament, the behavior, the body mass, everything in a child. What we do early in life really does matter. And we need to have a long view. But maybe we ought to add to mec sano and corpore sano, we ought to have corpore sano and edificio sano. And I put one of our laureates' buildings from, I believe this is the hospital in Fort Worth. I could be wrong. I should have put that beautiful concert hall. I can't believe that Carmel, Indiana, a suburban town of 100,000 people, could have a concert hall as beautiful as anything in the United States. And Jim Brainerd, the mayor, the operating arm, had really turned this city into a destination that no one would just drive by on Highway 80 and now not stop to see. So, corpore sano in edificio sano. Now, this business of, in pediatrics, when we look at a person, by the way, the internists all look down on pediatricians and they think of us as baby doctors, but we realize that all adults are simply babies. They just haven't figured it out. But when we see a child, we actually are looking at one frame in the movie, and we're trying to see the progression of the life. We're not just looking at that one particular moment. So, for example, when you take your child or your grandchild to the doctor, they plot out the height and weight, and you want your child to be roughly equivalent for height and weight. You don't want a child who is 50th percentile for height, for example, and 95th percentile for weight. Because if your weight's that high, your blood pressure's too high, your cholesterol's too high, your blood sugar's too high. And in this case I'm describing, the child's depressed because he's the last one to be picked at the sports events, he's not keeping up, he's somewhat isolated. Oh, I made this up, right? My pediatric colleagues are seeing 4 of these kids every single day in the United States of America. And we're really desperately confronting this. A good doctor doesn't immediately send the child to put them on drugs. Go to the, no soft drinks in the house. Get the TV out of the kid's bedroom if you can do it. Have them go to bed at a reasonable hour. Children that don't sleep well have much more trouble with obesity. Be involved in sports and come back in a month. And a month later, the child really hasn't changed at all. He can't change the food at school, can't walk to school because of the way we've designed our communities. And there's no time for exercise in the modern American lives. And a month after that, 2 months after that, the child's taking something for blood pressure, cholesterol, sugar, and at a cost of about $300 to $400 a month. And what I'm going to assert here is we've created an environmental set of diseases that we've then medicalized and at a real cost of both the health and well-being of that child and their family, but of America as well. Now, when I was a medical student, I thought that 7% of all the money in the United States going to medical care was a shocking amount of money. 7% of all the money in the United States. It's now about 18.5% of all the money in the United States is going just to medical care. Now, medical care, oh golly, that's great, right? Between 1900 and the year 2000 in Chicago, the average Chicagoan lives 30 years longer. And if you ask the doctors at the Hotshot Medical Center, why do people live 30 years longer? They're going to say, oh, we're really good doctors. But the real reason is two big I's. The two big I's are immunization, and by the way, it's nonsense not to have a child immunized. I'm going to say that with all kinds of passion. Thank you. Personal sidebar is my dad was a fighter pilot, survived World War II. At age 27, had 3 babies and a beautiful wife, developed polio, and died in 2.5 days. And I grew up in Newark, New Jersey, in near poverty as a result of what my mother and my family had gone through. So I have no patience for this, obviously. Probably why I became a pediatrician. The other big I that's added to lifespan in the United States is infrastructure. It's the built environment. It's better houses, less crowding, good air conditioning, good sunlight, ventilation, and the things that really improve where we live. By the way, healthy food, healthy workplaces. You would think with all the money we spend, we'd be the healthiest people. We spend twice as much money per capita as Great Britain, and we're number 46, 49 worldwide for life expectancy. So we're not getting very much for our money. Our oldest son is an internist, he's working at CDC, and he called me one day. He was working down in college. He was working in Costa Rica, and it was actually email. He said, Dad, the people in Costa Rica live exactly as long as Americans do, and they spend 7 times less per capita on medical care. And now as an internist, he's sitting there at the end of the disease pipeline feeling hopeless because he's seeing a parade of people with obesity, joint problems, diabetes, and a series of diseases that are really related to the world we live in. So I spent 15 years in the California Health Department. In '94, I went to CDC, and in the beginning, I was thinking about really classic environmental health things. Atoms of lead, atoms of chromium in our bodies, molecules of endocrine disrupting chemicals, PCBs, phthalates, and all the rest. I was thinking medium-sized threats, destruction of the chemical weapons of the United States. We were overseeing that, cruise ships that called on the United States and other things, and great big things like climate change and what's going to happen to South Florida and the rest of the United States. And Michael described a little bit of this. I'm driving down Buford Highway to a meeting to talk about the big threats of the 21st century, and I see an elderly woman walking along the road. It's 94 degrees, 94% humidity. She's carrying a plastic shopping bag, one in each hand, and she's struggling. She's got red hair. She looks like my mother, and I want to give her a ride, and I don't do it. And I go to this meeting, and I think, we're talking big stuff, and I'm thinking, that poor woman, she collapses, dies. The cause of death will be heat stroke, and it won't be absence of trees, poor air quality, heat effects from blacktop roads. And if she's killed by a truck going by, the cause of death will be motor vehicle trauma, and it won't be poor urban planning, failed political leadership, lack of sidewalks. And so that's what really led me to come back, and there was something else that happened. Around that time, I was reading Witold Verbinski's book, Clearing in the Distance, and because I was really struggling with how do you make sense of this world we're living in, and everything is just fragmented. And reading about Frederick Law Olmsted and how he at least dedicated himself to creating places that made people happier, mentally and socially and physically and healthier, it gave me a lot of inspiration. So Witold, I'd like to thank you so much for the contribution you've made in my own life and probably all of our lives. Thank you. I'm going to stay this for one more minute. So I was invited I started to write books and articles about it, and that's when I wrote this Sprawl Watch thing. It almost got me fired because the National Association of Home Builders were furious that I suggested how we were building America was bad for people's health, and I had no data. There were like 15 articles in English language literature over the last 50 years on the design of the built environment and human health. So I went to Seaside one time. I was invited to Seaside, and I met Robert Davis and a number of other folks. And the meeting was going along, and finally I jumped up and I said, damn it, this is code blue. We're talking academic stuff, and America's dying. And I'm going to show you why I was so worried about the trajectory we are on as the American people. We've removed 60,000 square miles of photosynthesis in the United States, equivalent area of the state of Georgia. Parking lots alone are the equivalent of the island of Puerto Rico, surface parking lots. We created 3 million of these garages that happen to have people attached to them every single year. We tell people to eat locally grown food, and then we take the finest farmland in the world and we cover it with subdivisions and housing, which become useless at that point. And I remember hearing Andres Duany give a wonderful talk with 2 slide projectors at Emory one day, and the fact that we have 4 parking spaces for every single car in America. I moved to after I left CDC, I moved to Los Angeles, and boy, I was just thinking, if he thought the clover leaf was the American national flower, what would you call that, a chrysanthemum? I mean, it's just and every meeting in Los Angeles starts with this statement, I'm sorry I was late. There was a wreck on something or other. Because you just can't get any, in fact, well. And so we've consistently built, not for the needs of people, but maybe for the needs of short-term return on profit, maybe for the needs of cars. My friend Howie sent me this slide, and imagine you had moved into this house up here and that is right there, and you made friends with the neighbors on the other side of the fence, and you said, let's get together for Easter holiday, and come on over and we'll have a big celebration. The kids will be there, but I can't pass the baby over the fence, and turkey, so we're going to drive. So I'm going to Google how to figure out how to get my neighbor's house 35 feet away, and I can drive 7 miles in 17 minutes to get to the neighbor's house. Now, obviously this is humor, but what's underneath all of this is we don't think about the needs of people, we don't think of the needs of children, we don't think of the needs of elderly, or anybody else in between. Now, this short-term thinking has led to things that scare me, and I resolved when I was at CDC, I'd never give another talk without talking about this issue. When I was born, planet Earth had CO2 levels of 300 parts per million. 1/6 of the CO2 increase to now 400 parts per million is to deforestation. And about half of the rest of it is due to enormous use of fossil fuels to move us around the landscape, and a good portion of the rest of it's used due to how we build our buildings. This is going to have, when CO2 levels go up, the temperature of the planet goes up. So since Chicago was founded, there's the real-life trend line for temperature on planet Earth since that time. The trend has been going up. Since the Chicago Exposition, the Great White Fair, that's the trend line, the dark blue one. Here's the trend line in my lifetime, and here's the trend line in my own child's lifetime. The oceans are becoming more acidic. We're looking at sea level rise in major portions of the world. And the old way we built is not right, and our young people are scared to death of the world we are giving them. I tell you, I struggle with depression. Here is the obesity map for the United States based on 200,000 telephone interviews. This is the one that gave you the depression data as well. Here's Illinois at 10 to 14% back in 1991 being obese. Here's 1997 up to over 20%, and here's 2010 over 25 to 30%. In Texas, over 30% of the population is obese. Probably not in Fort Worth because they can walk around downtown, but it's really a struggle in the US. And you get off the plane after being in Northern Europe, and you can pick out the Americans in the airport right away. We've added 27 pounds to the average weight of the average adult in the United States, about 17 pounds the average teenager in the United States. Gaining weight, it's not just cosmetic, it raises your risk of getting diabetes. The green line is the risk for women going up as their body mass index goes up. So a woman who's seriously obese has almost 90 times the risk of getting type 2 diabetes versus if she were thin. And for a man, it's about 40 times the risk. So it just goes up and up and up. So what does the diabetes map look like in the United States? Here's 1994, and you know what's going to happen. Here's 2001. In Illinois has gotten to about 7%, and here is 2007, the most recent data I could find, about 8 to 9%. So walk down the street now in Florida, and 1 person in 9, Liz, has a disease that's going to cost them their eyes, their kidneys, and their feet. As a pediatrician, this is just shocking. This study came out just last year. When I went to the pediatric diabetes clinic as a young doc, I never saw a child with type 2 diabetes. We called it adult onset diabetes, all juvenile insulin-dependent diabetes. Now you go into that clinic, and half the kids have type 2 diabetes, which, and their survival is worse than the kids with the type 1 because they've often got heart failure and liver problems and other diseases at the same time. The cost of this, we're now spending 2% of the entire GDP on diabetes, not just on medicine, on diabetes alone in the US. And we've only begun to harvest the effects of this avalanche of young people with type 2 diabetes. There's only one treatment that works for diabetes without side effects. It's walking. Tolbutamide, fenformin, all the rest of them have side effects. If you walk 10,000 steps a day, you reduce your risk of type 2 diabetes by about 60%, and with much fewer health effects. Now, I'm going to make it a little more dismal because then I want to tell you why we need to really create places that make people active. Here's a comparison, full-blown physical exam, 5,000 people a year, comparing people 25 years ago at the prime earning years of life with the last couple of years. Do you think people got healthier? We had lots of medical care. We've doubled medical care expenditures. Excellent health. Do you think it's gone up or down? We spent 17% of the GDP now. We've declined from 30% of our population saying I'm in excellent health to 13%. Can you go about your life without help? 5% relative increase, huge increase. Do you need a wheelchair or a cane? Doubling of the percent of our population. These folks aren't that old. You know that smoking went down, you know obesity went up, but this is the reason I want to talk to architects. This next slide. No regular, we've been wagging our fingers at people for 30, 40 years saying, be active, look how successful we've been. So we've gone from over half our population now has no physical activity whatsoever. We buy a carton of milk, we go to the local the Fort Worth Club or something else in our car for 3 blocks to go to the next meeting. So I think when we build places that inhibit and prevent people from being physically active, we are depriving Americans of years of life, freedom and liberty, and happiness. Because the best treatment for mild to moderate depression, I kind of said it, is physical activity and being around people we love. And it doesn't hurt to have good food and Mother Nature around and water features at the same time. So this is when I was a Secret Service man guarding my boss. But actually what it was an event on the West Steps in Sacramento where we spend $14 billion a year on price supports for corn and soy and things that people probably need to eat less of. We spend nothing on price supports for stuff that's healthy. So the stuff that's healthy is now twice as expensive in real dollars as it was a generation ago, and the stuff that's unhealthy is half as expensive. Folks, sidebar, but I know this is not architecture, but we need to tax sugar-sweetened beverages. Let's use the money to build wonderful buildings and places that kids can walk and use it for safe routes to schools. Let's use it for school gardens. Let's use it for health education programs. But nobody needs to be drinking a big gulp. We have got to create, as we think about our neighborhoods, kids need to walk to school. A child who walks to school learns better, behave better, socialize better. Even those with attention deficit disorder, David, do better if they have physical activity during the day. My pediatric friends, my colleagues, have written a prescription for kids in America on this, and they said we've got to redesign our neighborhoods. wait a minute. How many of you have better handed a prescription by the doc saying, redesign the neighborhoods, please? And it's exactly what this Congress for New Urbanism has been talking about, and all the rest of you. Well, that's young people. How about folks my age? Turns out at my age, if you walk 10,000 steps or 45 minutes about 3 to 4 times a week, they did MRIs and they came back a year later, did MRIs in the same group. The ones that were physically active had added 1.5% to their brain mass, and brain mass at my age correlates with intelligence and how mentally functional you are. And if you don't walk, your brain declines by about 1.5%. If you remove walking from people's lives. Almost done. Institute of Medicine is like the top docs in the country. They're asked, Academy of Science, they're asked, what do we do to deal with the obesity epidemic in the United States? They had 22 recommendations. They didn't put farmers markets first, but they're important. They didn't put tax sugar number 1. They put create places that make it easy for people to be physically active was their very first recommendation. Public transportation, we think of that as a way to have a lower carbon footprint, to get to work more easily, to read a book, to save money. Turns out public transportation, this is the study done in Charlotte, people that use public transportation after the course of about 2 years, the average person weighed about 6 pounds less than the people who, because it's all basically incidental exercise, you don't know you're doing it. You were talking, David, about Washington, D.C. When I was at CDC, we used to hire presidential management interns after they were in D.C. They changed them to presidential management fellows after Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky. But the women would always complain that when they moved to Atlanta after being in D.C., they gained 15 pounds in about the first 2 months. I'm not making that up, every single one of them, because they had to be in the car all the time. So AIA has shown good leadership. This is the healthier communities, and these documents are all free and online. Picture of the ULI, and folks were, I was being asked, is there good examples of healthy places that make money in Villa Verde and the South Bronx, the Rose Firm and others, and designing healthy places. Here are the 10 principles for a healthy place, and I love 2 of them, all of them, that they put out. These are the developers. Make healthy choices easy. So if you remember nothing else, put people first and make healthy choices easy. And this is their economic case for building for wellness. And this is a terrific document. It's beautifully laid out, just released in the last month, the toolkit for healthy places, about 80 pages with very direct directives all the way through. So I'll skip this one, but where I want to go with this is, it's a picture of my grandson who was freaking out for 4 straight months as his mother became more and more pregnant, started biting his nails and having temper tantrums and waking up at night. And when finally the little girl arrived, he decided she was the best thing in the world and his fingers got better. But where I'm going this is, not only should we have corpus sano in edificio sano, but we need a corpora sano in civitate sano, so a healthy body in a healthy city. So thank you so much for this wonderful award and your wonderful company. Thank you very much. Thank you. Well done. Thank you.